we recommend that the properties of LP gas awareness video is viewed prior to this one. Liquefied petroleum gas, LP gas, or as it is commonly known, LPG, is a safe, efficient and versatile fuel, and it's essential that the safe handling procedures shown here are followed every time LPG is decanted. The safe and efficient transfer of LPG in its liquid form, from storage containers to cylinders, is essential in the distribution of this versatile fuel. Let's take a look at the correct procedure for decanting LPG into a customer cylinder. This process will transfer a volume of LPG liquid from a bulk supply container into a smaller cylinder, using the difference in pressure between the supply container and the customer cylinder without the use of a pump. Generally, LPG is decanted into smaller cylinders for barbecues, camping appliances, and so on. An exception is where larger forklift cylinders are filled using the decant method by customers with a bulk cylinder at their business address. In all LPG transfer processes, there are strict rules to follow. Before you accept a cylinder for filling, it must be inspected to make sure it is safe to be filled. LPG cylinders must be approved. This approval includes the initial manufacture date or retest date, which is stamped on the cylinder neck ring. The test date stamp on the cylinder must not be older than 10 years. If there is no approval stamp or the stamp date is older than 10 years, the cylinder must not be filled. Now inspect the condition of the cylinder, looking for rust or corrosion, gouges or dents, paying particular attention to the underside of the cylinder. Identify what type of valve is installed in the cylinder. The leisure cylinder connection type 27 valve, or LCC 27 for short, has an external thread and an internal thread, whereas the type 21, or as it is commonly called a POL valve, only has an internal thread. If the cylinder is an LCC 27 connection, check the soft plastic seat inside the valve outlet for damage. If you see any issues with the condition of the cylinder or the test date, do not fill the cylinder. Return the cylinder to the customer and recommend they have the cylinder retested, or suggest they purchase a new one. Before you commence the decant procedure, check the test date and cylinder condition. If the cylinder is in an acceptable condition, then place it on the ground or on an earthed steel support. This will create a bond to discharge any static electricity. Do not use any plastic crates, timber boxes or insulating supports at any time. Make sure the fixed level gauge outlet is pointed away from you, as this will be opened during decanting to release vapor, to achieve the pressure difference necessary to transfer liquid. LPG liquid will cause cold burns or frostbite if it contacts bare skin or eyes. When decanting LPG, it is essential that the appropriate PPE is worn to protect against any cold burns or frostbite. PPE includes enclosed footwear, eye protection, hand protection and long-sleeved non-static clothing. Unlock the supply cylinder and select the appropriate filling hose assembly that is compatible with the customer's cylinder. The LCC 27 filling hose has an LCC 27 connector and is a right-hand thread. The POL filling hose will have a POL connector with a left-hand thread. Visually inspect the hose and fittings for cracks or damage. A POL filling hose must not be used to fill LCC 27 valve cylinders. The LCC 27 filling hose assembly must be used. Connect the decant hose to the LPG supply cylinder. Then check to ensure the dead man's handle is in the up position and the hose assembly is tightly connected to the decant storage vessel liquid outlet valve. Remember that this is a left-hand thread connection. With the customer cylinder firmly on the ground or metal stand, make sure the customer cylinder valve is closed. Then connect the filling hose assembly to the customer cylinder. With the cylinders connected, It's time to discharge any static electricity before opening any valves to allow the LPG liquid to flow. Remove both gloves and touch both the supply cylinder and the customer's cylinder valve body at the same time with bare hands to discharge static. Then put both gloves back on. Slowly open the supply cylinder valve to pressurize the hose. If opened too quickly, the excess flow valve in the hose connection may activate, resulting in no flow of liquid, so be sure to only open slowly. If the excess flow valve activates, then it may be many minutes before it automatically resets. Check for leaks in the pressurized hose and connections by using a soapy water solution. Depress the dead man's handle, then slowly open the valve on the customer cylinder to allow LPG to flow from the supply cylinder to the customer cylinder. With the system pressurized, release the dead man's handle and apply a soapy water solution, paying particular attention to the cylinder valve stem, the fixed level ullage gauge bleed screw and outlet, the safety relief valve, and the valve spindle. Monitor all valves, hoses, and cylinder connections during the filling process to make sure no leaks develop. If there is a leak, shut both cylinders' valves and retighten any leaking connections. Repressurize the system and undertake the leak checks again. If the leak cannot be fixed, do not fill the cylinder. Stop the decant fill process. If the issue is a leaking cylinder, disconnect it, move it to an open area, making sure no ignition sources are brought into the area, and advise the customer of the fault. If there are no leaks, depress the dead man's handle, open the fixed level gauge, which is also called the bleed screw, one full turn using the correct tool, usually a flat blade screwdriver, to allow an audible release of vapor. If a white wet mist is discharged from the ullage, this indicates the cylinder is already full. Release the dead man's handle, close the ullage and close the cylinder valve. The cylinder should not be overfilled. A dull hiss is the normal sound. If no hissing is heard, the ullage gauge may be faulty. Stop the decant process. It's not possible to safely fill an LPG cylinder with a faulty ullage gauge. Remain in attendance and stay vigilant during the entire filling process. Keep customers and the general public away, and make sure no ignition sources are brought into the area, such as mobile phones or naked flames. Do not use any clamps or bands to hold the dead man's handle open. Observe the hose and connections during filling for possible leaks. Stop the decant operation and close all valves if a leak occurs. When the releasing vapor turns to a visible white wet mist at the fixed level gauge, the cylinder has reached its maximum safe fill level of about 80% LPG liquid. Immediately release the dead man's handle. Leave the fixed level gauge bleed screw open until the white wet mist changes to a clear vapor stream. Then close the fixed level gauge bleed screw. Discharge any static buildup during the filling process by removing both gloves and touching the decant storage vessel and the customer cylinder simultaneously with bare hands. Replace your gloves and continue. Close the customer cylinder valve and carefully disconnect the filling hose. There'll be a small release of LPG liquid during the disconnection. Test the customer cylinder valve for leaks using a soapy water solution. Check the cylinder valve stem, the fixed level ullage gauge bleed screw and outlet, and the safety relief valve. For the Type 21, apply the solution to the outlet of the valve. For LCC 27 valve cylinders, open the cylinder valve and apply solution to the valve's outlet. Close the valve once inspection is complete. If no leaks are found, the filled cylinder can be returned to the customer. It is important to note that ammonia will attack the brass LPG valve. If your soapy water solution contains ammonia, the LPG cylinder and filler gun must be rinsed off thoroughly with plain water. It may be a requirement in some jurisdictions to fit a plastic plug or dust cap to the customer cylinder valve. It's recommended that the plastic plug or dust cap be installed prior to returning the cylinder to the customer. Do not install any screw-in plastic plugs into LCC 27 valve cylinders, as this may defeat the purpose of the check valve. If no further decanting is required, close the supply cylinder valve and carefully depressurize the decanting hose, ensuring there are no people or sources of ignition or drains nearby. Safely and securely store the hose. Finally, lock the supply cylinder lid. So what happens if, when beginning our decanting, the fixed level gauge is opened, but no LPG vapor is released? If no vapor escapes, then either the ullage gauge is faulty or the cylinder is completely empty. Depress the dead man's handle briefly. If no hissing is heard from the ullage outlet, stop the decant process. The cylinder must not be filled. Release the dead man's handle, close the ullage bleed screw, and disconnect the cylinder. Alert the customer to the fault. What happens if a cylinder is leaking when the decant is finished? Check tightness of valve and fixed level gauge. If the leak continues, move the cylinder to a safe open space away from any ignition sources and drains, remove any bystanders, and if required, disperse the LPG vapor with a water spray. Follow your site emergency plan and escalate as required. Remember to use a phone which is away from the cylinder. Do not use a mobile phone near the LPG vapor cloud, as the phone may ignite the LPG vapor. Decanting must only be performed in a well-ventilated outdoor area. As LPG vapor is heavier than air, the vapor may sink to the ground, where it can flow into drains, pits, basements, or pool in low-lying or poorly ventilated areas. Now let's recap. First, put on all your personal protective equipment. Then, check the cylinder's condition. Remember, if the cylinder test date is older than 10 years, it cannot be filled. Select and connect the appropriate decant hose and connect it to the supply cylinder. Make the connection between the supply and the customer cylinder and touch the supply and customer cylinder with both bare hands to discharge static electricity. Slowly open the supply cylinder valve to pressurize the hose, then depress the dead man's handle, which must only be operated by your hand. Do not use any wire, bands or clamps to hold the dead man's handle down. Check the decant hose and supply cylinder for leaks with a soapy water solution. Now, slowly open the customer's cylinder valve. Open the fixed level gauge about 1 turn and listen for the hiss of releasing gas from the fixed level gauge outlet. With the LPG flowing into the customer's cylinder, watch the fixed level gauge. When a white wet mist appears from the fixed level gauge, release the dead man's handle. When the white mist changes to a clear vapor stream, close the fixed level gauge. Discharge any static buildup using both bare hands, then close the customer's cylinder valve and the supply cylinder valve. Disconnect the customer's cylinder and check for leaks with a soapy water solution. Rinse off all brass fittings. If required, insert a push-in style plug into the valve outlet. Or, where required by state legislation, insert a screw-in plug into POL valve outlets only. Depressurize the decant hose, and if no further decanting is required, store the hose in a secure location such as the supply cylinder dome and lock the supply cylinder lid. LPG is a safe, efficient and versatile fuel, and it is essential that the safe handling procedures shown here are followed every time LPG is decanted.